Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Nan.
Hello and greetings.
Today's video is about the first episode of our Queen of the Black Coast book club. This short story was voted on in the community section polls. I have to admit, I rather like this short story. It's not without its problems. It's held up as probably the second most popular short story, second only to The Phoenix on the Sword. Although I find Phoenix on the Sword way better, and I like Elephant Tower more than this one. This is still a good short story.
It's written by Robert E. Howard. He's almost always perfect.
Most of the time. The story starts off with Conan escaping onto a galleon at sea. The captain is called Tito, and he's voyaging to Kush. He's voyaging from Argos. His ship is called by the same name. Conan climbs aboard but was being chased by the guards, who were chasing Conan because one of his friends apparently has a sweetheart whom a local guard was getting fresh with. The friend tried to defend his sweetheart. The guy tried to violate her. So this friend inadvertently killed this jerk. Conan helped him flee the city along with said sweetheart. Then was brought to court and in true Conan style, just said, I refuse to even answer this court. I refuse to acknowledge its authority.
I like Conan's response to this.
I don't understand it. He honestly doesn't. An above average IQ guy. And he's just like, I don't get this country. And I will not humor them.
So he decides to solve the problem.
Kill more guards, or at least it's implied he pled guilty. He killed some men and fled.
He also killed the judge.
Oh yeah, he also killed the judge. That's right. I like that part.
That's why I actually laughed a little when I read that.
Yeah. That's the part of this short story that's hilarious. Just his complete disrespect for the legal system. I'm not encouraging acts of violence I just find Conan funny.
It solved the problem.
Sort of. It also exacerbated the problem and he had to flee. Yeah, as you
Details.
As you guys could see, we had fun with this. Conan joins the crew. They travel past Shem, past Stygia, and arrive near the coast of Kush, where a lot of villages have been laid to ruin. They've been burnt to the ground with such devastation that the Captain Tito immediately recognizes the handiwork of Belit. Belit and her Tigress warship are mentioned for the first time on page 240 of the Black Book edition. And Belit apparently comes from Shem, and her ship appears on the horizon the next day. She comes upon the Argus, which she engages in battle with, and proceeds to slaughter almost the entire crew in battle. Her crew, it's interesting, are all black. Belit ends up interrupting her crew's near fight with Conan when he throws himself on board their ship so that she could try to persuade him to make sweet, sweet love to her. That's pretty much what happens. She calls herself Queen by Fire, Steel, and Slaughter. What's noteworthy is that for the Game of Thrones fans, Martin did not come up with the phrase fire and blood, so to speak. It's Robert E. Howard. So it's a nod to Robert E. Howard that he's doing there, which, okay, that's fair. I'm writing stories where I'm making nods to Robert E. Howard. His stories are lovable. In turn, Belit ends up ordering Nyaga, her, quartermaster, to tend to the wounds of Conan, which he does, and she claims that she is the descendant of kings of Ascalon. Right before, she does a very lurid dance for Conan, which ends in him deciding to do what she wants him to. I'm being very vague with the details because it's YouTube. Belit is one of the most popular characters in Conan's legendarium. And on one hand, it's not hard to see why. She is an attractive character. On the other hand, I don't find her as fascinating as, say, Zenobia or even to an extent, Valyria. I like that Valyria is trying to prove herself and she's a very capable swordswoman, almost on Conan's level. I really do like Zenobia as a character. She's probably my favorite female character in all of Conan's legendarium. But Belit occupies such a place that it's hard to say that I'm more neutral about her. That said, she has some of the best scenes, primarily in the last bit of her short story. What did you think of this first chapter? I like the first part, but I have to admit, it got dry in the latter. Well, I like the battle scene, but once she's chatting up Conan, I don't really like that scene as much. I prefer her at the beginning of chapter 2 of the short story, where we see her as the pretty competent captain. But what are your thoughts?
I enjoyed this chapter. Yeah, we get a rough introduction Tito and the rest of the crew pretty much slaughtered after Conan bonds with them. And Conan pretty much thinking, well,
Yeah, screw it. She's hot.
which was a little cold of Conan, but he's had to survive as a barbarian.
And as a mercenary and pirate before.
And with mercenaries, sometimes people you work with will die, and you just have to move on.
The interesting thing is, this is probably Conan early in his career. In his 20s, I think. Because you got to bear in mind, Conan in Hour of the Dragon, when he's about 42, has a lot more moments of sentimentality from what I recall of the comic book. He is occasionally prone to pausing for a minute to reflect upon the tragedy of the loss of life. Whereas in this story, he doesn't really ponder it. He's very full of desire for Belit.
A man of impulse.
Later, he is to mention that Belit would prove to be one of the only two women he could have ever thought of marrying. He says that in the comic book version of Hour of the Dragon, Conan the King. I'm not sure this is entirely accurate. I think eventually Belit and Conan would have gone their separate ways. I don't doubt that they were in love. She's the first love of Conan, and she's a very unique love interest of his. But the trouble is, I think she would have eventually turned on him. And this is kind of implied to an extent over the course of this story. She does love Conan. It's a complicated topic, and she's not a simple, straightforward character. Howard does a great job investing in her with a lot of depth and whatnot. To an extent, no fantasy author writes female characters like Howard, except maybe Tolkien. Little else to say about this chapter, I guess. So, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button, as though you were Conan smashing your enemies to itty-bitty pieces.